Hey everybody. Tonight it's testimony time. Um, so yesterday's verse of the day was Isaiah 41:10 for those of you who use YouVersion, the Bible app. And so I was reading that verse and it hit home. And all I could think about was the last year, almost exactly about the last 12 months. So I'm going to read the verse and then we're going to dive in. So, to give some context and hopefully to prove that by the end of the message, we're going to be coming back around to hope and a lighter side of things. Isaiah 41:10 says, "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." That verse meant a lot to me. The fact that you're listening to my messages on Man Up Online is a sign that this last year kind of ended for me, to be honest with you. And I'll explain a little bit in tonight's message about what that means and why that is. But just reading through those words, "Fear not, for I am with you." There's no need to be afraid or anxious or whatever the case is, because I am with you. I know you. I'm behind you. I have a purpose for you. Be not dismayed. Don't be discouraged. Don't be down on yourself. Don't be whatever, for I am your God. And that one feels a little simple or basic, but when you understand what it means to have a relationship and a faith in God, it means that I don't have to be discouraged because my God made me for a purpose. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I've always had a place in His will, just like you, every single one of you do. And so when I am down and out and not trusting in that walk, I just have to keep turning back and trust that if I belong to my God and He made me for a purpose, then there's a reason for everything. And this last part is just so true in the most humbling of ways for me. I will strengthen you. Let me tell you, in the last 12 months, all of my strength is from God. All of it. I will help you 100%. God, God, God. The things that I walked through in the last year, it was God who was getting me through it. It was God who was helping me along. It was God who was encouraging me when I didn't know up from down. It was God who gave me the strength to keep pushing forward, to keep doing the things that I did have a handle on well. And it ends with, "I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." God will keep me upright. I like to think of it as like God will keep me from drowning. And you can drown in the shallow end, y'all. I probably would have drowned in the shallow end this year if God hadn't been in the pool with me, just keeping me upright, keeping me afloat. So, that being said, let's dive in. I'm going to preface with a few things. One, I am trying to be as honest and forthcoming and raw and vulnerable tonight, so that those of you who need to hear it, because I feel like everything that we walk through, especially the tough moments, they're also for a purpose to bring God some glory. And so my message, somebody needs to hear it. Somebody needs to hear the words that I have to say tonight. And so I'm going to try to be as vulnerable as possible. But that being said, I'm going to be talking about some tough stuff as well. And I want to lead off by saying, one, this might not be one clean, unedited video, because I just don't know how I'm going to navigate talking through the different seasons of this last 12 months for me. And so if I slip up on my words or I'm not happy with the way I worded something or whatever the case is, there's a chance I'm going to be editing this bad boy. And on the flip side of that coin, I want to be perfectly clear before we jump in that I am going to be talking about some relationships within the last year, in particular, experiences that I had with a church I was with. I'm not going to name names, and I'm doing that on purpose. I'm not even going to cast blame, and I'm doing that on purpose. Because I went through what I went through, and it is what it is, and I don't want any judgment being cast where it doesn't need to be. And so let me be clear, tonight is not about casting shade at anybody or anything along those lines at all. So I'm going to pick and choose my words carefully and try to be as vague as I can be while being honest about what I experienced and how God got me through it. So that being said, we'll see if I throw out some reminders along the way tonight. Let's jump in a little bit. So I would describe the last 12 months kind of in 4 seasons, if we can use that analogy. My 4 seasons starting, give or take, around March, April. The first season was exhaustion, followed by what I would describe as identity crisis, followed by plague, and I'll explain that later, but plague probably. And then this last one, I think, is the season that we're all sharing, yay. And I would just label it as quarantine, because it really has been its own season, and I will explain what that season has looked like for me in my family context and what have you. So, and then I'm going to bring all of this back to that verse, and maybe I'll, tie it in along the way, hopefully. So season 1, I described as exhaustion, and I hope you can forgive me, all you parents out there who want to believe that having babies is a beautiful thing and should never be talked negatively about. Let me be clear. I love my children more than you could possibly imagine. And I don't regret going through this stage in their life, but it was a struggle. So my exhaustion stage, I have today twin 1-year-olds and a 2-year-old. It took us some years to get pregnant with our first child. We were quite literally, when we got pregnant, having the discussion about getting tested for fertility and looking into other options. So we felt like our first child was really a blessing and not necessarily a guarantee. And so after he was born, waiting a reasonable amount of time, we didn't try to not have kids, let's put it that way. And we got pregnant immediately. And when I say immediately, I mean immediately. And then the running joke, it's funny, we had people speaking into our lives about having twins the first time so much before we found out it was, just Judah. And so to get pregnant so fast and then to find out that we were having twins was a whirlwind. And it was exciting in a lot of ways. It's hard not to feel like the first kid alone was a big blessing and a surprise. So for a man like me to find out that I went from, I'm not sure if I can have kids, to having 3 sons is about as big of a blessing and just sign of favor on your life from God as I could have asked for. But that being said, my year started off with exhaustion because let me tell you, navigating a world with newborn twins and a 1.5-year old was unbelievable. I remember it being hard in the newborn stages with our firstborn. No sleep, late nights, crazy schedules, all those stages. If I can be transparent, it's not my strong suit. And I feel like I do a good job. I think I parented them well. I'm very much an involved, active dad, as I think all men, all fathers should be. But just because you try hard and just because you are active and involved does not mean it's easy or it's your strength. It ain't my strength. Newborn stage is like my kryptonite. And I struggled. This period, probably the first 6 months easy, was so hard for me. It was exhausting mentally and physically, in ways that I just couldn't fathom. We found it hard to get the kind of help we really needed because, let's be honest, who's going to take 2 or 3 kids off of your hands? It was a handful for anybody, and it was nobody's responsibility. So we navigated it with some family help a lot. But at the same time, found ourselves navigating that road solo a lot too. And even when we had help, the thing about it is if your help is just helping you, you're never actually getting a break. You just have a lowering of the intensity of the day to day, but you're not actually ever getting a break. And boy, did it take a toll on us. When I talk about what set the wheels in motion for all the changes and struggles we experienced in the last year, it was 100% having the twins and our family exploding in size and having the dynamics shift so dramatically. I remember at the time I was an elder. I was on the worship team. I was leading a young adult ministry. I was the men's minister. And who knows, probably trying to be involved any and everywhere else, because that was my life. That's what I love to do. It's where my passion was. And I was always super involved with work too. So I was involved in other anti-violence initiatives and things like that. And things came to a screeching halt. I remember thinking in my head, well, I'll just find a replacement for a few weeks. I'm going to need, a couple of weeks off. And then it was, well, maybe I'm going to wind up needing a couple months off. And it became very apparent to me pretty early on in the game that I'm dead wrong. And I'm in a season I'm not necessarily prepared for. And I'm the kind of guy who has a hard time taking things off my plate when I love them and I'm passionate about them. So this whole last year really kicked off with the fact that not only did I have these kids, not only was I super tired, super mentally strained and drained, but I was starting to shift the dynamics of my entire life. And so I was saying goodbye to some ministries. We had pretty much more or less put on hold the young adult ministry. I think hoping that we were going to maintain it somehow or change how frequently we were doing things or whatever. But regardless, we were starting to step down from some ministries and make time, knowing that to say yes to our kids, we had to start saying no to something else, even if it was good and even if we loved it. We just had to find space in our life. And the hardest thing was starting to let go of the reins of Man Up. I started Man Up in 2012. felt like God was leading me in that direction for years before. I didn't even know what it was going to look like years before, when God just kept putting it on my heart and putting it on my heart. And so to start to tailor that down was a difficult decision, and one that I was learning to live with. And so imagine all of this going on, and will continue to go on, as I mentioned, for several more months, because the newborn period didn't stop after like 3 months. We enter into season 2. And it's safe to say that these seasons weren't just like one ends and another one starts. They were kind of cumulative. So season 2 rolls around, and that is identity crisis. And the reason that this season started was because of a pretty major change that happened in my life and the life of our family. We had a major walking away from our church family. We had a incident that took place that we had kind of just lost trust in the church that we were attending. And to be blunt, more or less, it just came down to the realization that I was struggling to feel like, when I was really being honest with myself, I very quickly realized I didn't feel like I could worship at that church with a clear head and a clear spirit. And that's important. Like, if you can't come in to any worship situation or anything without baggage that you're not able to work through, or whatever the case is, then like, you've got to find a way and a place that you can do that, because your relationship with God is not necessarily tied to a specific church body. And I'm a huge believer of the church. I love the church. I still love the church no matter what happened. And so it, more or less, we had this situation, and felt like I needed to look for another place to worship and another place to serve, because we just were kind of at odds with each other. And that was a hard move to make. Let me tell you, there's a couple of things that come to mind in hindsight that I think are really, really accurate. And that is that, one, ministry is super personal. There is no, even though you want to treat it like a business transaction at times, and I was doing things voluntarily. I can't, it's got to be even more complicated when it's something that you're paid to do, for instance. You want to treat it like a business transaction because you're serving a role. And at the same time, there's no way to do so because it's emotional and it's deeply personal. And so when you have to make breaks or changes or whatever the case is in your life, sometimes it's messy whether you like it or not. And I kind of hate that fact. And it was for us. And that's just a part of our walk. It's a part of our story. The reality is, we dealt with, I think the hardest part for me emotionally, the hardest part for me to swallow in this walk was that the unknown was problematic. I mentioned that the first hard part is the fact that it's so personal. So no matter what I wanted to do to try and lay it down and just treat it like a business transaction and move on, even when I wasn't letting on to people that I was in pain and that I was hurt and struggling in a lot of ways, the reality was, deep down, I was probably trying to fool myself, and it wasn't pretty. The other half of it was that when you're trying to leave a church in the best way possible, which is and should be, I guess, in my opinion, I still believe this, to do as little damage as possible to the church itself. a lot of times you don't have a lot of options when the situation is kind of messy, but to just try and leave quietly. And that is what I tried to do. In hindsight, I don't even know if I have a good or a bad. Um, if I could have done it better or worse, or whatever the case is. I think it just kind of is what it was. Um, but we tried to leave quietly, knowing that it was going to leave people confused, knowing that there was no way to explain to people why we were leaving without causing issues for the church. And yet at the same time, there was no way to accomplish the lack of damage without having people frustrated or mad at us. And that's probably the story of this season, was that the initial rumors that caused me to, I guess, lose faith in that particular body. It's probably not even the right wording. Trust, maybe. And that made me realize I needed to find a healthier place for me personally to serve, because I was having a hard time letting it go. But those initial rumors weren't really the issue, as much as, like I said, what happens in the aftermath of trying to leave silently can be rough. And it was for us. The rumors that followed for a couple of months did a lot of damage behind the scenes. And I don't say that to make anybody feel bad. If you're watching this and you had anything to do with this situation, please understand. I'm telling you point blank, this isn't a grudge match. This isn't about casting blame or shade or anything like that, as much as it's explaining how I wound up in the place I did. And it was hard for me to, I don't think what people realize is the choice we made wasn't easy to begin with. And it kind of started with hurt and pain. And it just got compounded because we immediately lost our church. We lost our church family. Very few people understood what happened or why we left the way we did. In fact, I still don't know whether it was the right decision or not, but a lot of times we didn't even really discuss it with people. We would just point them back to the elders of the church who we knew the situation and felt like it was better that they work through that with their congregants, with their church family. And so we dealt with a lot of blowback for a few months from people that we would have called our family, weeks before, months before, and so forth. And to top all of that, I had already started to have to say goodbye to certain ministries that I realized I was defining myself by. And this incident and leaving our church body that we were so deeply involved in, and then having nowhere to go and no place to serve, is what really instituted what I call season 2 being identity crisis. And I promise you, to this day, I did not know it was such an identity crisis for me until 2020, like into 2020, and looking back and evaluating things and realizing where I had come from and what I had walked through and where I was emotionally and spiritually and everything else, and realizing like, wow, I lost myself. I did. We did our best to plug into a church as quickly as possible. We knew that we couldn't do without it. We knew it was important to be involved, or at least have a place to go and to keep worship up and all of that stuff. And at the same time, the identity crisis continued, because even when we found a new church home that met our needs, which were different than they had been in the past, and we kind of connected, the big problem is we still had 3 babies. And so we found a new church home, and we were being fed in a way, but I wasn't serving. I really didn't have the means to serve because of our new family life and because of the demands of having so many young children. We couldn't join a small group because that really wasn't doable. Scheduling didn't work. Daycare really wasn't an option. And so we didn't get to connect with people through small groups either. So we really weren't serving in any leadership roles, and we weren't connecting with people very well either. It was a desert, to say the least. We had church, we had worship that we loved. We were being fed fairly well, all things considered, and yet we still felt like we were in an island or in the middle of a desert. We felt isolated. We felt like we were having trouble making connections to people. Probably still are kind of in that boat, but we're coming out of it. And then slowly realizing, now here's the hard part, y'all, and this is where things, I guess I've already been a little brutally honest. I'm throwing myself even further under the bus. I was really losing my relationship with God pretty significantly, which was weird because it wasn't me losing my faith in God. I still the whole time 100% believed in God, 100% believed in the church, Him, Jesus, all of it. Like nothing, there was no crisis about my faith per se, as much as there was a major chasm between me and God that wasn't there previously. I wasn't praying anymore. I wasn't reading the word anymore. I wasn't studying anymore. The lack of leadership position, the lack of need to prepare lessons and be on top of things and all of that, further had me not feeding myself spiritually. And I did this probably from the moment we left the previous church until maybe a month or 2 ago. Just like drowning in a pool or in quicksand and not even knowing it until you can barely catch your breath. I did this for a while. And the sad part is like, I knew it too. It was a very strange thing to know how much I was struggling to spend time with God the way I knew I should. Starving with a steak in front of me at any point that I wanted it and not eating, and I knew it. And at the same time, like just failing to have the motivation to do it. And I couldn't explain why. And it kept getting worse. So this brings me to season 3. And everybody's like, why in the world is season 3 plague? What does that mean? It means I caught the plague, y'all. So I go through everything that I've been describing. I've been talking for almost 30 minutes now. I go through everything that I've been describing, and hoping that things are going to improve as the kids get older and some routine starts to change and so on and so forth, and it doesn't. this is when my season or our season of illness set in like a storm. Um, I managed this year to catch pneumonia four times. I randomly got sick in September of 2019 and just happened to get a chest x-ray because I was having trouble breathing. And sure enough, I had pneumonia. And I don't get pneumonia that often, but I did. I managed to get through that first bout relatively quickly, and then the fall wasn't terrible until about Thanksgiving, November. Once November hit, all of a sudden everybody was getting sick all the time. My first bad bout, we had our babies collectively so sick that I put a drop cloth on the playroom floor because they were throwing up that much that often. And after they had all passed everything around for like a week, one night I slept with one of the twins on my chest because he was not getting through the night. And so I slept in a Chase lounge with him on my chest. I woke up the next morning and immediately knew I was in trouble. And so I went to the doctor and was being treated for the flu, and knowing that I was worried it was in my chest, but I was being treated for the flu, even though I tested negative. By the end of the week, instead of getting better, the fevers had subsided, but the pneumonia had set in really bad. Friday, I thought I was on the mend and instead realized that walking up the stairs about knocked me out. I got to the doctor's office only to have an emergency breathing treatment, was sent to the ER to get on IV medication, and before they could even get that done in the ER, I wound up crashing, spending a day in the ICU, and then a few more days recovering in the hospital with my second bout of pneumonia. And as you're all hearing this today, you're thinking, that dude had COVID. I 100% believe I had COVID-19 in 2019, back in December. But nobody was talking about it back then. I never got tested. Tested negative for everything they threw at me. Nobody had a clue what was going on. I, from that point on, continued to bounce back and forth out of sickness at an escalating pace for a couple of months. I got sick again and then developed pneumonia again a month later. Spent several days at home, was on the strongest pharmacy medication that you can be prescribed, and was told by the doctor, if nothing changes, that we're going to have to do additional testing. Well, I made it 2 weeks and wound up in the hospital with a fourth bout of pneumonia, unexplained, testing negative for everything. I went through it, y'all. I had one of the hardest seasons of my life when it came to illness. I've just never experienced anything like that, and it was so hard to go from healthy to sick to healthy to sick over and over and over. After the fourth bout, I had to take medical leave just to keep up with the follow-up appointments and the lung scopes, and I'm still waiting on a no surgery, believe it or not. And I share all that to say, it was like a Job moment. I remember, and you get a whole lot of free time, let me tell you, to think and get in your own head when you spend that many days in the hospital and you're that ill, and you should spend time at home for that matter. And it made me painfully aware of not only how much of a crisis I was in with my identity, spiritually, physically, mentally, all of it. It also made it that hard to catch up. I remember numerous times thinking, man, I've got all this time. I'm going to start studying again. I'm going to start getting in the Word again. I mean, I had all these glorious plans and not a one of them happened. I couldn't even get to where I was praying in a regular, healthy way, much less picking up my Bible. I just wasn't. And again, I wasn't angry at God or anything like that. I was just lost. I was in the dark, felt myself slipping down this dark hole and not necessarily knowing what in the world I was supposed to do to get out of this funk that I was in. And knowing what the medicine was, like I knew exactly what was missing and I just couldn't get there. And I did this for months. Like I said, starting in probably November and carried on through March, which conveniently led into season 4, which everybody's been experiencing, and that is that of quarantine. So here's the catch. Everybody has experienced quarantine in a different way, and I'm not going to get into a political or whatever debate about policy and right moves and this and that. What I have at a baseline tried to describe is that everybody's experience is wildly different because you have people getting paid, you have people not getting paid, people with financial stress, people without financial stress, people with physical stress or even illness, and people with nothing, people who lost family, people who haven't experienced anything at all. And then there's the issue or the debate of some people are quarantined and they're bored. They're watching Netflix like crazy. They're learning how to cook. They're doing projects that they never thought that they would get to. They're, I've heard everything like, working on my spiritual well-being. Let me explain my quarantine life. My quarantine life involved us losing daycare, our agency shutting down, and me and my wife spending 24/7 at home with 1-year-olds, twin 1-year-olds, and a 2-year-old, all of which who lost all their routine. And we can't really go anywhere, and we can't really do anything. We can't even go to the parks or anything like that. And we've been living that life 24/7 since the middle of March. And we have not had a break yet. It's insanity, utter insanity. No space to work on mental well-being or wellness. No space to take care of ourselves physically. We have just managed in the last probably month to start figuring some things out spiritually. And it has taken some work. So like everybody's like, oh, you can just do church online, right? And that should be good enough and blah, blah, blah. Let me tell you, it's not. And it's not for a few reasons. One, we miss the social aspect of being in a church body, and we needed it. Like even in the 12 months of struggle, it was an outlet. We had people who cared about us and checked in and some social interaction. We also had daycare, children's services at that church, which meant that on Sundays, no matter how crazy our week was, we knew that we could show up, drop our kids off with a program that is phenomenal, and not think about our children for the next hour to hour and a half. And it was the most brilliant break, the biggest blessing, to be able to focus on God without distraction for an hour and a half. Quarantine church is online, and thank God our church does an awesome job of offering more options than you can, imagine. But the big one for us has been, we figured out we had to start doing online church on Saturdays because it's at 5:00. And if we manipulate our children's schedules, they can nap till like 5:30 or 6. and we can barely get through an online church service without complete and utter insanity in the room. So quarantine season has been like the turd flavored cherry on the top of a giant crap sundae, which is like the grossest description I could have come up with right now. And I just did it, and I'm sorry, but it's 100% true. It has been a year, y'all. So now that I've spent like at least 30 minutes talking about how awful our year has been and creating the biggest pity party, I'm going to unpity party this, because that's what this is about, and explain how this verse mattered. Because there were moments, as the verse says, fear not. You guys, like, I'm not an emotional guy. I don't wear my heart on my sleeve. Super logistical, straight-faced, even-keeled. And there were moments that, like, I was struggling and even in fear. Like, I was trying to figure out whether I was going to survive, like, laugh or not, like how I was going to survive the newborn stage, how I was going to survive that season 1. And then I was fearful about losing myself during that identity crisis. Like, I was freaking out trying to figure out, like, what the heck is becoming of me? You know, God had all these plans, and I thought I was living out his will, and everything's falling apart, and I don't know myself anymore, and what in the world is going on? There were moments when I'm really honest with myself, during that plague stage, I was afraid. And I probably didn't let on to it with my family, because they had enough on their plates. And I mean, my wife is a saint getting us through that alone, because I don't know how she did what she did, worrying about me, trying to take care of me, and then also having to deal with the 3 kids who also kept getting sick. It was a nightmare. And yet I say that, like, that ER experience when I went to the ICU was horrifying. I realized after the fact, and I wound up in the hospital again, I have like a weird sense of like PTSD from that night, because like, I was freaking out about the littlest things, because my experience was awful. I went through so much only to hit a quarantine stage that for some people felt like rest, and me felt like turning the dial up to 12 after we just went through the gauntlet. And yet my God is like, fear not, I'm with you. And I'm like, I mean, you're joking, right? Like, I know you're with me, but it still feels like hell. I'm still afraid. I'm still struggling. I still don't know how I'm going to get through this. And God's like, fear not, I'm with you. And here's the thing, is he was this whole time. When I didn't know how the heck I was going to survive raising 2 newborns and a 1.5-year-old, I did. I made it through. It wasn't pretty at times. I feel like I did a pretty awesome job, all things considered, because I tried really hard. But I also know flat out that God was the one who like gave me the extra bit of strength every time I didn't think I could make it. Every time I thought I was going to lose my cool. Every time I thought that I wasn't going to be able to stay awake or function or keep my sanity, whatever the case was, like, God was always there. He was there when I was losing who I was and my identity crisis, when I didn't feel like I understood who I was as a person anymore, much less in his will. He's like, don't worry about it, I got you. And he taught me about stages and seasons in his own will, and that I was in a season of not even rest as much as it was like just endurance. I was in a season of endurance with God where I was going to go through stuff, and he wasn't promising to clean it up or make it pretty. He was just promising to be there with me through it all. And he was. He kept his promise. He was with me even when it was terrifying. He was with me when I was sick and I had stuff flashing through my mind and I was thinking things that I don't typically think. He was with me in the ER. He was with me in this basement when I was just ill beyond measure. He was with me in the ICU and all of it. When I was thinking horrible things, I remember having one of the worst nights in my house because my body just wasn't right. And I swear to you, I don't know if I was having panic attacks or what, but I thought my heart was going to explode. I remember thinking, like, I can't wake up my wife because I can't do that to her. And at the same time, like, I think I'm going to die. And I got through the night and everything's fine, but like, it was horrible. And God was with me through it. And I knew it. Like, I actually turned to God during most of that night and was just like, what the heck? You got to get me through this. And he did. He was with me the whole night, like the whole time. I just kept my cool. I was freaking out, but like never crossed that line. He was always with me. Do not be dismayed. Do not be discouraged. Like, I was discouraged. Like, how do you navigate knowing so clearly where you belong? Especially in church and in ministry, if that's your life in any way, volunteer or paid, like, and you've started to identify as that you've started to identify as pastor of some kind or whatever the case is, and then that disappears for whatever reason, good, bad, or ugly, it's a part of your identity. It's a part of who you are. And when that goes away, I was discouraged. I just didn't know what the heck I was doing anymore. And the funny thing is like, it's God. So like, he knew this whole time, like, hey, give it 12 months. It'll be fine. It's no big deal. Like, bad things happen. Ships crash all the time. We'll get through this. Hang on. I got a plan for you. No big deal. Well, I'm, over in the driver's seat, like clinging to the wheel, losing my mind. God's like, you don't have to worry about it. Don't be stressed out. Don't be discouraged. Like, yes, it feels like the bottom of the barrel. Yes, you aren't doing anything right now. Yes, it doesn't feel like you're serving me like you're used to serving me. I don't even need you to serve me right now. I just need you to be fed. I just need you to survive this and then be filled back up. And then I need you to come back with some fire ready to go. And it's really awesome to say that today. It's really awesome to say that 12 months ago, I started losing all of it. 12 months ago, I started a stretch of 4 seasons where I was discouraged just like all the time and just losing myself more and more and more and not understanding what my place was in his will more and more and more. And the whole time, God is like, I got you. Don't worry about it. Like, it's going to come back. Don't stress. It's cool that you still feel that passion. It's cool that you still want to do this stuff. You just don't know how and you don't understand my plan or how it's going to work out. That's fine. You're going to get there. And here I am 12 months later and I'm reading this. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. Darn right, he's my God, because he got me through all of this. And out of nowhere, in the middle of quarantine a couple of weeks ago, it's like a light bulb clicked on, y'all. And the season was over. I'm still in quarantine, and it's still awful, let's be honest. But it's like God just ripped back the curtain. And I don't know how to describe it. It's like I was asleep, and then one day God walked into the room and ripped my cover off, turned on the light, poured cold water on me. He's like, let's go. It's time to get back to work. You've been resting long enough. And the weird thing is, as much as I thought that I would need like a recovery period, it's the opposite. Like, getting back into ministry and feeding myself and like having the motivation to do that. Like, I'm reading scripture, I'm praying again, I'm just going in. And I don't even know how to explain it. Like, all of the energy, all of the motivation, it's all 100% God. 100%. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I've got you. Like, there's a plan in place. We're about to do this thing. And like, here I am talking to you again, 50 minutes in on a message. And it's all God, right? It's all God. I will strengthen you. Do I even need to explain that? Like, I don't even know on some levels how I am doing what I'm doing, how I even have the mental or physical strength to record these messages after spending a day with the kids. And like, some of you have watched the TikTok stuff that I do, and it kind of all started with a family TikTok. And we've gotten all these comments about like, oh my gosh, you guys are living your best life in this quarantine. We're like, no, you're getting like the 2% silver lining. That's not our insanity. That's not all the crazy. Like, I'm showing you the highlight film when I post a video. God's been giving us the strength. I 100% don't know that I would have made it through the plague season, much less the quarantine season, without just, quadruple doses every single day of God's strength, period. End of story. I will help you. He's been helping me every step of the way. None of this makes sense. None of it gets overcome. There is no victory such as this very moment short of God helping me through. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. And I mentioned toward the beginning of this message that this last little bit, I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. And I pictured literally drowning in a pool and God coming up under my shoulder and holding me above water, literally holding me upright so that I'm not drowning in the shallow end. And when I explain why did I give such a testimony tonight? Why did I record this super long video? Except to show you that I went through one of the weakest points of my entire life in the last year. It was the definition of hard season after hard season after hard season, weakness after weakness after weakness, failures throughout, struggling literally. I talked about the fact that's like, I could have a Bible in front of me. I know I need to eat spiritually, like I know, and here's this filet mignon right in front of me. Wouldn't it be great if you took a bite? Sorry, can't do it, right? Like, I was not even holding myself up anymore. And God just kept picking me up. He just kept me going. And, I always think back, I first heard this poem way back as a kid. A lot of you know it, and I'm not going to try to recite it because I don't know it by heart or anything, but, Footsteps in the Sand. And it talks about how this person was looking back at their life and noticed that there was only a single pair of footsteps in the sand of his life. And so this person asked God, like, where were you? Why weren't you there? And he's like, you don't understand. Those aren't your footsteps walking alone without me. Those are my footsteps while I was carrying you through your hardest moments. And by golly, if God wasn't carrying me through a huge chunk of this last 12 months, at the very least, there are 2 sets of footprints, because he was holding me up under their shoulders, just helping me take my steps day by day throughout the last 12 months. Like, that's all I can say. The moment I saw that verse of the day, Isaiah 41:10, and I'm reading these lines, I knew. It was like, that was me, 100%. That verse was for me to remind me where I came from, what I walked through with God's strength and help, and the fact that I have victory today. And I said, somebody needs to hear this message. As long-winded as it is, somebody here needs to hear that message, because you've been going through 1 or 2 or 3 or all 4 of those same seasons, And you need to believe there's a point to this. You need to believe that God can get you through this, that there's an upswing, right? You need to believe that you can come out of this thing with victory. And I'm telling you, it's already done. You've got to go to the right source. The only way out of it, the only way to both get through it and then come out on top of it is through God. This verse is about God, right? It's not about me. It's not about me surviving diddly squat. It's about God reminding me that I don't have to fear. I don't have to worry. I don't have to be discouraged because my God has got me. The strength is going to come from him. The help is going to come from him. Standing upright is going to come from him. And all I have to do is trust in him. That's it. That's my testimony for you guys. And I don't know that I've given such a raw, honest, spiritually meaningful testimony in my life. Raised in the church. I never had that big conversion moment or anything like that. But man, this year was a struggle. And I feel like I only shared like the roadmap, the tip of the iceberg roadmap of what happened over the last year, not even talking about the mental struggles I had and the places where Satan came fully loaded, and he knew all of my weak points. He knew all of my kryptonites, and he came with a duffel bag full, ready to go. And God brought me through all of it. And I'm, in a weird way, as energized and motivated and spiritually amped up, ramped up, ready to go as I was a year ago. I should have been beat half to death and come out of this thing pulverized. And instead, somehow, I feel like I walked out of the tomb at Jesus' side with no explanation. Like, I'm straight up Lazarus. He just told me to get up one day and start walking, and I did. And I can't explain it outside of God is good all the time. You can say it back all the time. God is good. That's my message for you tonight. If you hung in there, you deserve a medal because this bad boy is long, but I hope it means something to you. If you need a word, if you need to talk it out, I know I'm doing everything online. Private message me. I would be happy to offer you some level of encouragement. But I hope this video meant something to somebody. I love y'all, and we'll keep it going. Amen.